Hi friends, welcome to another video. If you are new to watching, my name is Crystal. Thank you so much for being here in my little corner of YouTube. This is going to be my last video of 2023, and I'm going to be talking about my top 15 books that I read this year. I read a little over 60 books this year, so this was actually pretty hard to narrow down because I read a lot of really great books in 2023. Some of the books that I am going to be talking about are part of a series. So what I did is I just picked out my favorite book in that series. Even if it was like a 5-star series for me, I tried to narrow it down to my favorite book in the series, which was actually really hard. So I'm just gonna jump right in, and these are not gonna be in any particular order. It's honestly impossible for me to put these like in a ranked order from 1 to 15. I just can't do it. So I'm just gonna go through them as they are sitting right now in their piles. The first book, we're starting off strong, Does It Hurt by H.D. Carlton. This was my first H.D. Carlton book, and I was immediately hooked on her writing. This is about Sawyer and Enzo, and they end up just randomly meeting one day and hitting it off. But something happens between them that causes a little bit of a rift. Enzo is a shark researcher, and he ends up taking Sawyer out on his boat, and they end up getting in a boat accident. And they end up coming across this really creepy lighthouse. They go into this lighthouse to try and find help. And the things that transpire once they get inside is not what they would have expected. This book has almost like a thriller type of undertone, which I absolutely loved. I just loved the mix of the thriller vibes with the dark romance. This book is also very spicy. All of H.D. Carlton books are spicy. Enzo is not the type of male main character that a lot of people are going to love. I will just put that out there right now. You're either gonna love him or you're gonna hate him. I personally loved him and I just understood him, but I know a lot of people that have read this book that absolutely hate him. So it kind of is just dependent on the person. But I loved how dark and almost creepy this book was, and mixing that in with the spicy romance, I just devoured this. Loved every second. Next up, we have Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. This is another dark romance. I would say that the first half of this book is a little bit more difficult to read. Definitely check the triggers if you need to on this one, and also on Does It Hurt, because these are dark romances, so they cover darker topics. This book is about Dean and Cora. They end up getting abducted randomly one night, and they are being held captive in a stranger's basement. And the things that happen to them in this basement, the things that they have to go through, are very traumatic, and they're basically trying to find a way to survive. And the things that happen to them really shifts the direction of not only their lives, but of their relationship. So like I said, the first half of this book does cover some tough topics. There are some somewhat graphic scenes. Just know that going into this one. But the second half of the book is more like your typical adult romance, and it's a lot easier to read. You're taken through so many different emotions while reading this. It's almost as if you can feel the trauma of the characters. So even though this book is very dark and takes you through a lot of trauma, it is also very beautiful and very deep and meaningful. And even if you're someone who doesn't really like the dark romance genre, or you've never read that genre before, I would still highly recommend reading this. We read this in my book club. I can't remember what month it was, but there was a lot of girls who had never read dark romance before that ended up really, really loving this book. So if you have not read this, this is your sign. Okay, next up we have Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. This is a college football romance, and this book is about a group of friends who are very, very close. Kind of reminds me of, if you've seen the show The Summer I Turned Pretty, how it's that group of friends and they go to the beach house every summer. It's very similar to that. Now, one of the main characters, Ari, in this book, she has very deep feelings for one of the guys in her group. And so this book takes you through the dynamics of that relationship. I don't want to say more than that because I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a character that comes in, and his name is Noah, and he ends up being one of the main characters in this book. He is loyal, he is charming, he's just one of the, I don't know, I just loved him. I loved his character so much. But I also really liked the setting in this book as well, because they are in college and all the guys are football players, so they all play on the football team. And I love football, and so this sort of reminded me, like, it took me back to my high school days where I would go to the football games every Friday, and it's just like that environment. And this is not just like a surface level romance. It's very deep. It is very meaningful. I cried in this book, and I rarely cry when I read books, but this one got me. Okay, the next book, this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, but it is Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. Now, it kind of depends on what order you read these books in because there's different orders. I read Throne of Glass first, and then I read Crown of Midnight second, and I read The Assassin's Blade third. Some people read The Assassin's Blade first. So if you go that route, then this would be technically the third book in the series. So it kind of just depends on the order. But for me, this was the second book that I read in the Throne of Glass series. I really don't know why people don't like this book because a lot of people say that this is their least favorite book in the entire series. And I just don't agree. I loved this book so much. Obviously, that's why I'm talking about it. I will say it was very hard to pick because I really loved Empire of Storms. I really loved Queen of Shadows, and I loved Kingdom of Ash. Those books are all incredible as well. But I think the reason why I chose this one is because the setting of this is just so my vibe. It is dark, it is mysterious, there's twists and turns, and it is set in like a big, dark, almost creepy kind of castle. There are lots of secrets that are revealed in this, like lots of mysteries that come out. There's like secret rooms that aren't known about, and they have to kind of navigate through these secret rooms, through this dark castle. It just had a bit of a dark, spooky, mysterious vibe to it, and that is just my kind of book. So I think that's why I like this book the best, is because of the atmosphere. And also, this book was very, very easy to follow, very easy to understand. There's not a ton of politics and world building where I found myself being confused at all. Like, this was just very, very easy to read. I was able to just sit down and read this and actually enjoy it without having to like think of all the detailed politics and world building. But all the other books in that series are just incredible. So it was very hard for me to pick my favorite, but I think that's why I picked Crown of Midnight. It just really comes down to storyline, the setting, and the ease in which I was able to experience this book. So Crown of Midnight, favorite book in the Throne of Glass series. I said what I said. Next book is Twisted Games by Ana Huang. Oh my God, y'all, I ate this book up. This is the second book in the Twisted series. I have not read book 3 or book 4 yet. I plan to read those very soon, but this book was so fun, so fun. This is about Bridget and Rhys. And Bridget is a princess who is slated to be the queen. So she's part of the royal family. She ends up hiring Rhys, who is her bodyguard. They really don't hit it off in the beginning. They actually bump heads. They're very opposite. Rhys is all just like business. He is very stoic. He's very closed off. He has his walls up. And Bridget is very opposite of that. So they kind of bump heads at the beginning. The spice in this series is so good. And the angst, and the buildup, this is just pure fun and enjoyment, okay? If you just need a book to sit down and turn your brain off and just binge the Twisted series, oh, I cannot recommend it enough. Obviously, I haven't read the last 2 books yet, but I can only imagine those are going to be really good too. I just had such a blast reading these. Okay, next up we have Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. This is another dark romance series. This is the first book in the series. There's also a little prequel novella called Satan's Affair. And then the second book in this series is Hunting Adeline. Let me tell you, this was really hard to pick which was my favorite book in that series. But I think what sets this one apart for me is that this book was kind of spooky and kind of eerie, and it had a little bit of a paranormal undertone, which I was not expecting, but I absolutely loved. Also, the setting of this was in this big, creepy, old, almost like gothic type of house. Y'all, that's just my vibe. Kind of similar to Crown of Midnight, where I was talking about that, where it's just set in this big creepy castle. This one is set in this big creepy house. And like, I'm just a sucker for that type of setting. And I think that the second book, the reason why I didn't choose that one is my favorite, which I still love the second book so much. But I think the second book just is a little bit more, like, it's not as fun. While it still talks about really heavy topics, there was still a lot of fun elements to this book, like the thrill of the chase. That was fun for me. And then the setting, and there's also like a little bit of a mystery undertone to this. And the second book in the series is not fun. There is nothing fun about the second book. It was a lot more serious, a lot heavier. And while I love the second book for so many different reasons, I think I picked this one because it just wasn't as heavy as the second book. And I had a much better time reading this one. The second book is very difficult to read. There are some very, very, very graphic scenes in the second book. But if you have no idea what this series is about, it's basically about a stalker who is infatuated with Adeline, and he will do anything to get her. These books are not for the faint of heart. They are not for everyone. But if you like dark books and you have not read this series, it's one of my favorite series of all time, ever. Next up, we have Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I think this is probably going to be on a lot of people's lists for their favorite books in 2023. This book is just incredible. It is so fun. It takes you on just like an epic adventure. Essentially, this book is about Violet, who ends up going to a war college to be a scribe. She wants to be surrounded by books and writing and be in the library. That's like where she is comfortable. But her mom, who is basically like the headmaster of the school, forces her to go be in the writer's quadrant, which is a very high stakes quadrant to be in at the war college that they're in. So they have to go through all these physical challenges in order to make it through. And at the end, their ultimate goal is to bond with a dragon and become a dragon rider. Everything about this book I just absolutely loved. The writing is amazing. The characters are incredible. Oh my gosh, the dragons in this book are so fun. They all have their own little personalities. The banter in this is funny. The romance and the spice is so good. Xaden is one of my favorite male characters in any book. I also feel like this book was very easy to understand. It was very easy to follow. It didn't have a ton of world building and a ton of complicated politics. It does have some, of course. It's a fantasy book. There's going to be those elements in a fantasy. But to me, they were very easy to understand, very easy to follow. I never found myself getting confused. If you have not read this, I'm telling you, please read it. And even if you are not a fantasy reader, I just would highly recommend that everyone reads this book. It is so good. Next up, we have a thriller, and that is The Girls in the Cabin by Caleb Stevens. You guys, I cannot shut up about this book. If you've watched any of my past videos or you follow me on my Bookstagram, you're probably tired of hearing me talk about this book, okay? I talk about it so much, but I mean, that's for good reason. I absolutely love this. This is one of my favorite thrillers of all time. If you are a thriller lover, please read this book. It is amazing. It has so many twists, so many turns. The characters are great. I felt so connected to the writing. The setting is everything. It is set in like a creepy cabin in the middle of the woods. This is the perfect book to just like curl up and read on a stormy winter night. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, like continuing to just turn the page. I needed to know what was happening. I just honestly think that the storyline and the writing in this book is brilliant. Caleb Stevens is an independent author, and I believe the only place that you can find this book is on Amazon. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I will link my Amazon bookstore down below in the description, and this book is on my Amazon bookstore if you wanted to grab it. Next up, we have Indigo Ridge by Devney Perry. This is the first book in the Edens series. I have only read 2 books in that series. One of my goals is to finish the Edens series sometime very soon. Oh my God, y'all. This book is the perfect mix of romance and mystery. I was addicted to this book. I could not stop reading it. Saw my last video. I talked about them in that video as well, but Griffin reminded me of Rip from Yellowstone, and he is one of my favorite TV characters. Like, that is my man, okay? Rip is my man. There's also a murder mystery aspect connected to this book too, and so I just loved the mixing of the 2 genres, adult romance and mystery. Like, it can't get any better for me. I absolutely love the Eden family, their little town of Quincy, Montana. If you could put me in any setting in any book other than like Harry Potter, of course, it would be the Eden series, because their town is so quaint and small and charming. I just love everything about their little town. I love everything about their family. But this is one of my favorite books of the year. I cannot recommend it enough. Next up, we have the Mindfuck series. Now, I know a lot of people label this book as dark romance, but to me, this is more of a detective serial killer thriller with splashes of romance, because this book mainly is about Lana, who is a serial killer, and she is on the hunt to get revenge on a group of men who did something really bad to her and her family 10 years prior. That is the main plot in this book. Now, there is a subplot of romance. She ends up meeting an FBI agent. He is investigating a bunch of murders that are happening. And little does he know that the girl he is falling for is the killer. Now, that is not a spoiler. You can read all of that on the back of the book. And also, as soon as you start this, you know this book going in that she is the killer. But I have never rooted for a main character so much in my life. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the show Dexter, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. But you know, Dexter is a serial killer and he works for the Miami PD. But you're rooting for him because he is killing bad people. There are some pretty graphic scenes in this book, so just know that going in. There are some spicy scenes in this as well, but I wouldn't consider this a spicy book. I think there's a difference between labeling a book as a spicy book and there being spice in a book. Does that make sense? I would say that, in my opinion, the spice in this is fairly mild. If you are someone who likes detective serial killer thrillers, and I think you would absolutely love this because it takes you through the details of the case. It takes you through crime scenes. And if you like shows like Law & Order SVU, like that type of thing, then I think you'd really enjoy this. But do know going in that there are some graphic scenes and there are some spicy scenes as well. Next up, we have The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. This is about Millie, who gets hired to be a housemaid working for a very wealthy family. She's basically a live-in nanny. So she runs their errands, she cleans the house, she does a lot of the chores around the house. And the attic room that she lives in is very small. When the owner takes her up to the room for the first time, she notices that there's a lock on the outside of the door rather than on the inside. So she's like, well, that's a little weird. But she really needs this job, so she doesn't really think anything of it. But as she's working for this family, some really weird things start happening. The family starts acting very strangely, and the mystery sort of unravels from there. But this is another one of my favorite thrillers. I devoured this. It is full of twists and turns, which is exactly what I want in a thriller. If you like thrillers and you have not read this, what are you doing? You need to read this as soon as possible. Next, we have Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. I love this story so much. It was deep, it was meaningful. This is also told in multiple point of views, so you get Bree's perspective and you get Archer's perspective, which I just love in a romance because I always want to be in both of their heads. I just really connected to both of their characters. And Archer and Bree are both going through their own internal battles that they're struggling through. And they both just help each other through their struggles. It was just really beautiful to read about. And I just absolutely love Bree and Archer's story. Okay, next up we have another book from a series, and this again was so hard to pick my favorite book in this series, but that is The Stopover by T.L. Swan. This is the first book in the Miles High Club series, and I've talked about this series before. I talked about it in my last video as well. This is one of my favorite series of all time. It's absolutely just the most entertaining series I think I've ever read. But this series is about a group of brothers. There's 4 brothers, so there's 4 books in the series. Each book is about a different brother. And these brothers own a multi-million-dollar agency in New York, and they also have a location in London as well. But they are very rich. But this book specifically, I think the reason why I picked this book out of the entire series is, number one, Jameson. I just love him. I love him. I love me some Jameson. Also, this is a workplace romance. I love a good workplace romance. I think it's because that's a location where you're supposed to behave. You're not supposed to be getting frisky at work, you know? And so I don't know what it is. It's like that, it's almost like the thrill of it, you know? And so reading about it is just so freaking fun. In this book, Emily and Jameson end up meeting randomly on a plane, and they have a one-night stand. They go their separate ways, don't talk anymore. Anyway, Emily ends up starting a new job, and when she walks in to meet the CEO of the company that she's working for, guess who it is? None other than Jameson Miles. So it kind of unravels from there. Oh my God, y'all, I'm already getting hyped again from this book. It's like a scandalous love story. And honestly, their relationship at some points is pretty toxic, but I love toxic shit, okay? I love toxic shit. I don't want that type of relationship in my everyday life, but like reading about it in a book and just escaping and being entertained by that, I eat it up. Okay, I have 2 more books to talk about. The next one is going to be Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Oh my gosh, this book has my whole heart. This book has my heart. This is one of the like most beautiful, wholesome books that I have ever read. I would consider this honestly like a historical romance with dashes of fantasy. Iris and Roman are journalists for a paper, and they don't really get along when they first meet because they're competing to be columnists at the same paper that they work for. But they end up making this very magical connection through letters that they are writing to each other on a magical typewriter. There's also a war going on between two gods, which is where the fantasy aspect comes in, and Iris's brother is fighting on the front lines in this war. This is just some of the most beautiful writing I have ever read in a book. There are so many amazing quotes in this. The writing is so poetic and lyrical. Iris and Roman's relationship is so wholesome and pure. The ending does leave you on a cliffhanger as well. So I am just dying to read the next book. The next book is called Ruthless Vows, and that is the last book in the series. This is only a 2-book series. Even if you're not a fantasy reader, don't let that sway you away from reading this book, because I promise you, it's not the type of fantasy that you're thinking of. This is more like whimsical fantasy. It's not high stakes fantasy, which are completely different from each other. So if you've not read this, please give it a chance. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, the last book for my top 15 books of 2023 is none other than House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Crescent City series. I'm actually not even done with this book yet. As I'm filming this, I am right there in this book. So I have like 350 pages or so left in this. This is a beast of a book. It is 800 pages. I am not even done with this book yet, and I can already tell you it's going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I read the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I read the entire Throne of Glass series. I would highly recommend going in that order if you haven't read all of the books yet. Would highly recommend going in that order. If you're thinking about starting the Sarah J. Maas universe, I would start with ACOTAR, then go to Throne of Glass, and then dive into Crescent City. Those books will prepare you for this beast of a series. There are also some little nods to Throne of Glass in this book as well. So there are some things that are talked about, some little things that are mentioned that will just make more sense and mean a lot more if you have read Throne of Glass. The writing is insanely good. I don't even know how Sarah J. Maas writes these books. Like, what goes on in that brain of hers? I don't know. How does she build these worlds? How does she build these characters? How does she write the way that she does? I don't know. I can't even fathom. I went into this completely blind. I had no idea what this book was about. And it is so incredibly different than ACOTAR and Throne of Glass. This is more of a modern day fantasy. Like, they have cell phones, they're in school, they go to clubs, they have jobs. Like, it's that type of modern day fantasy. Whereas ACOTAR and Throne of Glass is not like that at all. There is also a murder mystery plot that I was just not expecting. To be honest, I had no idea what to expect going into this, but I have been just pleasantly surprised by the storyline. I've actually been able to follow it quite well. Now, I will say I'm reading this book very slowly because I want to make sure that I'm comprehending everything and taking it all in so that I don't get confused, because there is a lot of politics and a lot of world building in this. But the thing that I love most about Sarah J. Maas's writing is that she doesn't stay on the politics and world building for an extended period of time. She just does it in little pockets as the book goes on. And I love that, because as someone who can sometimes get very overwhelmed by the politics and world building in a fantasy, I can really appreciate the way that she just throws it in little pockets as the story goes. But I also love that this has so many different types of fantasy creatures. There's wolves, there's demons, there's vampires, there's angels. I don't know, I'm just really loving the dynamics in this book. I am very much enjoying it. And I can already tell you, without even having finished it, this is one of my favorite books of the year. I've also heard that the second book is absolutely incredible. Like, apparently the second book is even better than this one, and the ending in that one is just like jaw on the floor type of ending. So I am ready for it. I will be reading the second book in January, and then the third book comes out at the end of January. So I will probably be reading that in February. But that is it for me today. Those are my top 15 books that I read in 2023. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of my YouTube family in 2023. I'm very excited to see what's to come in 2024. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I will put all of my social handles down here on the screen. I would love it if y'all would come follow along over on those platforms as well. Again, thank y'all so much for watching, and I hope y'all have an amazing new year. I will see y'all in 2024.